The master of the pyramid is not Khufu. He found it here. The house of the Sphinx stood before him. Beside the house of Isis, mistress of the pyramid, you stand on the Giza plateau. The sun has just set, leaving the sky a bruised purple, and the three great pyramids are now black silhouettes against the fading light. The air, finally cooling, carries the scent of ancient dust and the distant sounds of Cairo. You're before a small temple, insignificant in the shadow of giants. Inside, a replica of a stone tablet rests in the dim light. It is called the Inventory Stela, a forgotten footnote in most histories dismissed as a later copy, and yet its words feel older than the sand itself, a quiet whisper that seeks to unravel everything you thought you knew about this place. Why does this official record tell a story so different from our own? Before we decipher this impossible timeline carved in stone, take a moment. Breathe in the cool desert air. Let the silence of millennia settle around you. This is where our journey begins, in the space between what is written and what is remembered. Wherever you are listening from tonight, a quiet room in Kyoto, a high-rise in New York, or under the southern stars in Santiago, welcome to Sapiens Untold. I have just 2 questions for you. Where are you listening from? And what time is it where you are? Take a moment now to settle in, get comfortable, dim the lights if you can, and let the outside world fade away. We're here to explore the quiet places, the forgotten corners, and the questions that linger in the shadows of history. If mysteries like this pull at you the way they pull at me, consider hitting like and subscribe. You're not just a listener, you're part of the expedition. With that in mind, let's return to that small, unassuming stone resting in the dust of Giza. Let's get closer to the whisper that seeks to rewrite history itself. Your flashlight beam moves across the stone, and the hieroglyphs emerge from the shadows. Each symbol is a window into a lost moment. You're not a translator, but you can feel the weight of the story here. This isn't a grand tale of conquest. It is an inventory, a list of works, and this is where the timeline begins to fray. The text is attributed to Khufu, the pharaoh credited with building the Great Pyramid. Orthodox history is built on this foundation, but the stone in front of you tells a different story. It says Khufu was clearing sand away from the Sphinx when he found the house of Isis, mistress of the pyramid. It describes him repairing the ancient monument, not creating it. He found a lightning strike had damaged a sacred sycamore tree nearby. He repaired the headdress of the Sphinx. These are the actions of a custodian, a restorer, not a creator. The stela claims the pyramid was already there, ancient and revered, long before Khufu ever walked this plateau. Egyptologists have an answer for this. They say the stela is not an original document from Khufu's time, but a copy made 2,000 years later, during the 26th dynasty. A piece of religious propaganda, perhaps, designed to give an ancient temple a more prestigious history. It is a plausible explanation. And yet, a question lingers in the quiet air. Why would a later pharaoh commission a record that diminishes the glory of one of Egypt's greatest kings? Dynasties built their legitimacy by associating with the monumental achievements of their predecessors, not by reducing them to the role of caretaker. The stone doesn't argue, it doesn't persuade, it simply states an inventory of what was found and what was done. A quiet administrative record that, if true, means the story of this place, the real story, is thousands of years older than we know, and the builders are not who we think they are. You descend a steep, narrow staircase deep into the earth beneath the Temple of Hathor at Dendera. The air grows thick and warm, heavy with the scent of stone that hasn't breathed for 2,000 years. The passage is so constricted you can touch both walls at once. Down here, in the silent subterranean crypts, the world above vanishes completely. There is only the cool, smooth limestone and the flickering of your guide's light against the walls. He stops, gesturing towards a long, horizontal relief carved with breathtaking precision, and there, you see it. An object that feels profoundly out of place. A large, transparent, pear-shaped bulb rests on a stand. Inside it, a long, wavy serpent stretches from one end to the other, exactly where the filament of a modern incandescent light bulb would be. The base of this bulb appears to be a lotus flower, but it functions like a socket. From this socket, a thick braided cable runs across the floor to a small box, upon which the god of air kneels. Supporting the entire device is a Jed pillar, the ancient symbol of stability and power, looking for all the world like a high-voltage electrical insulator. The accepted explanation is purely mythological. Egyptologists tell us this is a depiction of creation, the snake god Harsomptus, emerging from a lotus blossom at the dawn of time. A beautiful symbolic image, but you cannot shake the details, the precision of the cable, the clear distinction between the bulb and the filament, the function of the Jed pillar as a support. It feels less like a myth and more like a technical diagram. And then you remember where you are. In a sealed, windowless crypt deep underground. You look up at the ceiling. It is pristine. There are no soot marks, no trace of the smoke from the thousands of oil lamps or torches that would have been needed for artists to work in this absolute blackness. So you must ask the forbidden question, how did they see? The answer perhaps is not a myth at all. It is a schematic carved into the stone waiting in the dark. You move from the crypt at Dendera to the temple of Seti I in Abydos. Here, high above your head on a massive stone lintel, another set of images defies easy explanation. They are not as vivid as the reliefs below, weathered by centuries of wind and sun. But what you can make out is unmistakable. You see the clear outline of a modern helicopter. Next to it, what appears to be a submarine or futuristic aircraft. And beside that, something that looks like a high-speed jet. Mainstream Egyptology explains these as a palimpsest, a place where one set of hieroglyphs was carved over another. The official story is that the name of Seti I was filled with plaster and recarved with the name of his son, Rameses II. Over time, the plaster eroded, and the two sets of overlapping symbols accidentally created these modern shapes. A trick of erosion, a coincidence. But you lean closer, tracing the lines with your eyes. You see the distinct shape of a rotor blade, the tail fin, the sleek aerodynamic fuselage of a jet. The coincidences begin to feel improbable. And you remember that the ancient texts themselves speak of strange things. The Palermo stone, one of Egypt's oldest chronicles, describes the Shemsu-Hor, the followers of Horus, who ruled for thousands of years in a remote golden age before the first human pharaohs. They were said to possess great and terrible wisdom. Could these carvings be echoes of that lost knowledge? Not a coincidence of erosion, but a deliberate record. It's a challenging thought. It suggests that our understanding of language itself might be incomplete. Perhaps we assume every symbol is mythological because we lack the vocabulary to read a technical manual. We see gods and serpents when the stone may be trying to describe circuits and filaments. The possibility is unsettling, that the most profound secrets are not hidden, but are simply written in a language we have forgotten how to read. The air grows cold as you descend into the Serapeum of Saqqara. This is not a temple built for sunlight. It is a man-made mountain, carved from the living bedrock, a network of colossal tunnels stretching for hundreds of meters in the deep dark. Your footsteps echo in the immense quiet. The walls are rough-hewn, functional, not decorative. This was a place of industry, not worship. Then you see them. Lined up in recessed chambers on either side of the main corridor are 25 granite boxes. Sarcophagi is the word you're given, but it feels inadequate, insufficient for the scale of what is before you. Each box is carved from a single block of Aswan granite, weighing an estimated 70 tons. The lid alone weighs 30. You place your hand on the surface. It is impossibly smooth, polished to a mirror finish. The stone is cold, eternal. Orthodox history tells us these were for the burial of sacred Apis bulls, but you run your hand along the inner corner of one open box. It is a perfect 90-degree angle. The flatness of the interior surfaces is measured to within fractions of a millimeter, a level of precision that modern engineering firms would struggle to achieve today, even with diamond-tipped computer-guided machinery. The ancient Egyptians of the dynastic period had copper and bronze tools. How do you carve granite, one of the hardest stones on earth, with that level of precision using soft metals? And there is another detail that haunts you. Most of the boxes are completely bare. No identifying marks, no pharaoh's name. Except for a few, which have crude, shallow hieroglyphs scratched into the polished surface, almost as if they were added much later by people who found these objects and tried to claim them. It feels like graffiti on a masterpiece. The boxes whisper of one technology, one level of skill. The inscriptions speak of another, far less advanced. It's as if two different civilizations are present here, the builders and the inheritors who could no longer understand what they had found. You are alone now, in a quiet workshop. On a steel table before you rests a single, small block of black basalt, brought from a quarry site near Abu Rawash. Its surfaces are perfectly flat, its corners impossibly sharp. It feels heavy in your hands, dense with mystery. An engineer's precision square is placed against the edge. There is no gap. Not a sliver of light passes through. This block is evidence of a process, a methodology that is entirely absent from the historical record. Petrie, the famed Egyptologist, found evidence of high-speed drills that could cut through solid granite at a rate hundreds of times faster than modern drills. He documented ancient saw marks that showed blades, meters long, cutting through basalt with an efficiency that defies explanation. He found stone bowls with interiors so perfectly hollowed they could only have been turned on a lathe for granite. Consider the challenge. To move a 70-ton box from Aswan to Saqqara is a logistical feat even with today's technology. The distance is over 900 kilometers. Then, to lower that 100-ton object down a narrow shaft and maneuver it through tight underground corridors, placing it with millimeter accuracy inside a tiny stone alcove, the problem becomes astronomical. Auguste Mariette, the archaeologist who rediscovered the Serapeum, used 300 men just to move one of the lids a few feet. He failed to get it back on. These were not tombs for bulls. They feel more like components, precisely engineered pieces of some grand, unknown machine. The purpose? We do not know. The builders? We do not know. All we have is the evidence in the stone, a level of technical mastery that appears fully formed at the very dawn of Egyptian history, only to slowly fade over the centuries, as if the knowledge itself was a forgotten inheritance. The precision is a language, and it tells a story of a lost science we're only now beginning to recognize. You are in a climate-controlled vault at the University of Turin. The air is dry and still, smelling faintly of old paper and preservation chemicals. Before you, laid out beneath protective glass, is a document known as the Turin Papyrus. It is fragmented, damaged by time and rough handling, but what survives is one of the most exhaustive king lists ever discovered from ancient Egypt. At first, it seems to confirm the standard timeline of pharaohs, listing them with the precise lengths of their reigns, down to the exact number of months and days. It is a bureaucrat's dream, a testament to the meticulous record-keeping of the Egyptian scribes. But then your eyes move to the columns of text that precede the first human king, Menes. And this is where the document becomes a mystery. The papyrus lists dynasties of divine beings who ruled the land for periods far exceeding any human lifespan. First, it names a series of gods, each reigning for hundreds or thousands of years. Then it lists the Shemsu Hor, the followers of Horus, the same mysterious predecessors mentioned on the Palermo stone. According to this official document, these beings ruled Egypt for a staggering 13,420 years. After them, a dynasty of human kings begins, leading all the way to the time the scroll was written. This section is almost always dismissed. It is called myth, metaphor, a religious preamble to the real history. But the scribe who wrote this made no distinction. He listed the gods and the Shemsu Hor with the same factual administrative tone he used for the human pharaohs, the same precise count of years, months, and days. It is presented not as a myth, but as a continuation of the same historical record. The papyrus asks you to consider a terrifying possibility that we have not misread a myth, but have instead chosen to ignore a history that we are not yet ready to accept. You trace the timeline with your finger, moving backward through the glass, past Rameses, past Tutankhamun, past Khufu. Further back, past the unification of Upper and Lower Egypt, into the pre-dynastic period. You keep going, following the unbroken line of kings recorded by the scribe. The ink is faded, the papyrus brittle, but the numbers are clear. The total length of the reigns listed before the first human pharaoh comes to over 23,000 years. It's a timeline that doesn't fit our model of history. It directly contradicts the established narrative of human civilization, beginning only a few thousand years ago. And so, it is edited. It is rationalized. Historians suggest the long reigns of gods were symbolic, that years meant months, or that the numbers were exaggerated to create an epic past. But what if the scribe was simply recording what his sources told him? What if the document is accurate and our timeline is the thing that is wrong? This is the central dilemma of these texts. They don't just hint at advanced technology, they describe a completely different chronology for humanity. Manetho, an Egyptian priest from the 3rd century BCE, wrote a history of his country that largely matches the Turin Papyrus. He too lists dynasties of gods and demigods ruling for millennia before the pharaohs. His work, which survives only in fragments quoted by later historians, formed the very basis of modern Egyptology's dynastic system. Yet the parts that don't fit our timeline are quietly set aside. You lean back from the glass case. The silence of the vault feels profound. In this room, you're surrounded by a history that has been curated, edited, and interpreted for centuries. But the original document is still here. It waits patiently, holding its impossible numbers. It suggests that the ruins we see today are not the beginning of the story, but perhaps the end of a much longer, grander one. A story whose earliest chapters are now so old, we mistake them for myth. The laboratory is silent, save for the low hum of ventilation. The sterile, white environment is a world away from the dust and heat of the desert. On a table under a focused beam of light sits a small, unassuming clay pot. It is roughly the size of a human hand. Discovered near Baghdad and dated to around 250 BCE, it is unremarkable at first glance. An iron rod is suspended in the centre of the pot, held in place by an asphalt plug. Inside, surrounding the iron rod but not touching it, is a copper cylinder. You watch as a technician carefully adds a weak acid, grape juice, something readily available to the ancients, into the vessel. A multimeter is attached. The display flickers to life. A small but steady electrical current is being generated. This simple clay pot is a battery. We are taught that the principles of electricity were not discovered until Alessandro Volta created his voltaic pile in the year 1800. Yet here, in this lab, a 2,000-year-old artifact quietly refutes that timeline. What was it used for? Some archaeologists speculate it was for electroplating, coating cheaper metals with a thin layer of gold or silver. Evidence of such gilded artifacts has been found in the region. Others suggest a more esoteric purpose, perhaps a mild form of electrotherapy used by priests in healing rituals. The pot itself doesn't offer any answers. It carries no inscriptions, no user manual. It is just a tool. But its existence implies a body of knowledge that has been almost completely lost. It hints at experiments, at discoveries, at an understanding of chemistry and physics that is not supposed to exist for another 2 millennia. It's a small object, but it generates a profound question. If they understood how to make a battery, what else did they understand that has not survived to be tested in a lab? What other devices now lost were powered by this silent ancient current? You lean closer to the monitor of a scanning electron microscope. The image on the screen is a granite core sample, drilled from a hole found at Giza, magnified thousands of times. The technician points to a series of grooves spiraling down the sample. These are the tool marks, the fingerprints of the machine that made this cut. The grooves are perfectly even, separated by a consistent 2.5 millimeters with each revolution of the drill. This regularity speaks to an incredibly advanced feed rate, the speed at which the drill pressed down into the stone. Analysis shows that the drill bit penetrated the granite at a rate that is 500 times greater than what a modern diamond drill can achieve. Let that sink in. 500 times faster, with tools that are supposed to be made of copper. This is not a matter of interpretation or mythology. It is physics, measured and recorded. The forces required to cut granite at such a speed are immense. Copper would simply buckle and melt. Even our hardest steel alloys would struggle, yet the evidence is here, etched into the crystalline structure of the stone. Furthermore, the shape of the cut suggests the drill bit was thinner at the centre than at the outside edges, and tapered, which is a design feature of modern core drills, but one that seems impossibly advanced for the dynastic Egyptians. This isn't just a simple hole, it is a signature of a lost manufacturing process, a technology that was somehow both more efficient and more powerful than our own. The stone doesn't lie. It holds the memory of the tool that shaped it, and that memory describes a machine that, according to our history books, could not possibly exist. The evidence of its power waits quietly on a screen, asking us to reconsider not just who built these monuments, but how. You are in the hushed halls of the Palermo Archaeological Museum in Sicily. Sunlight streams through the high windows, illuminating dust motes dancing in the still air. Here, amidst Roman statues and Greek pottery, rests a fractured slab of black diorite. It is one of 7 surviving fragments of a much larger stela, one of the oldest historical documents on Earth. This is the Palermo stone. Your gloved fingers hover just above the surface, tracing rows of impossibly small, precise hieroglyphs. Unlike the Turin Papyrus, this record is not written on a fragile scroll, but carved into one of the hardest materials known to the ancient world. It is a royal annal, a year-by-year record of the most important events during the reigns of Egypt's earliest kings. It lists religious festivals, the creation of statues, military campaigns, and most importantly, the height of the Nile inundation for each year, a critical piece of data for an agricultural society. The detail is obsessive, scientific. Yet, like the Turin Papyrus, the top register of the stone begins not with human kings, but with a list of pre-dynastic rulers who reigned over the whole of Egypt for thousands of years before the first officially recognized pharaoh Menes. The stone does not call them gods, it simply lists their names, giving them the title of king. This is not a mythic creation story, it is a dry, factual logbook, and that is precisely what makes it so challenging. It presents a continuity of rule, a seamless transfer of power from these primeval kings to the historical pharaohs we know. It suggests that the civilization of dynastic Egypt did not spring into existence fully formed, but was instead the inheritor of a far older kingdom. The stone is a fragment, a whisper from a time so remote it has passed into legend. But it is a whisper carved in diorite, a material that does not easily forget. It asks us to accept that the history we have written is missing its earliest and perhaps most important chapters. The texts are one thing, but you need physical proof. You move from the museum to a place of pure data, a radiocarbon dating facility. Here, time is not measured by king lists, but by the slow, predictable decay of atomic isotopes. You examine a spreadsheet displaying the results from a series of samples taken from the Giza pyramids. These are not from surface contamination, but from organic material, flecks of charcoal, fragments of reed, found embedded deep within the mortar, sealed between the massive stones since the day they were laid. The orthodox timeline, based on the historical reigns of the pharaohs, places the construction of the Great Pyramid around 2500 BCE. But the carbon dating tells a different story. The dates consistently come back older, not by a few decades, but by centuries. On average, the samples date to a period 300 to 400 years before the reign of Khufu. This discrepancy has been known for years, often dismissed as the result of using old wood in the construction, the idea that the builders used wood from trees that were already centuries old when they were cut down. But the problem with that explanation is its consistency. Across dozens of samples from multiple pyramids, the age difference is always there. And then there is the geology. Geologists examining the weathering patterns on the Sphinx and its enclosure see deep vertical fissures, evidence of significant rainfall, carving channels into the limestone over centuries. The Giza plateau has been a desert for more than 5,000 years. The last time this region saw the kind of sustained rainfall needed to create such erosion was between 7,000 and 9,000 BCE. Thousands of years before the pharaohs, the science and the ancient texts begin to converge. The carbon dates point to a greater antiquity. The geology points to a greater antiquity. And the king lists speak of a civilization that existed for millennia before our own history begins. You are left standing at the intersection of conflicting data, where the hard evidence of science seems to support the very timelines that have been dismissed as myth. The wind whips across the desolate plateau of Abu Rawash, a few kilometers north of Giza. It is a stark, empty place, littered with the ruins of a pyramid that was either never finished or systematically dismantled in antiquity. All that remains is the core, a scar on the landscape. But it is here, in the debris field, that you find some of the most compelling evidence of lost technology. You kneel beside a massive block of rose granite, one of hundreds scattered around the site. Carved into its surface is a deep, perfectly circular channel. This is not the work of hammers and chisels. It is the remnant of a colossal core drill, which sliced through this stone like a modern machine cutting through foam. You run your fingers along the inside of the groove. It is smooth, almost polished. What is breathtaking is the scale. The striations in the stone, the telltale marks left by the drill bit, are still visible. Engineers who have studied these marks calculate that the tool which made them was advancing into the granite with a force that is orders of magnitude greater than what was believed to be possible with ancient Egyptian tools. Some have even suggested that the only way to achieve such results would be through the use of ultrasonic machining, a high-frequency vibration that allows a tool to pulverize super-hard materials with incredible speed and minimal pressure. Ultrasonic drilling is a 20th century invention, yet the evidence of its use, or something mechanically similar, is written here in the granite of Abu Rawash. This was not a ceremonial object. This was industrial-scale quarrying, a process of shaping and moving stone on a level that is difficult to comprehend. The ruins here feel less like a tomb and more like an abandoned factory, its purpose forgotten, its powerful machinery long since vanished, leaving behind only these impossible cuts in the stone as silent testimony to a forgotten age of masters. You're no longer in Egypt, but in a geology lab at a major university. The air smells of ozone and heated rock. A geologist, a man who has spent his life reading the stories told by stone, places a thin cross-section of Aswan granite under a petrographic microscope. The light polarizes, and the mineral composition of the rock blooms into a psychedelic tapestry of color. He points to the quartz crystals, which appear as shimmering islands of grey and white. Then he traces their edges with a laser pointer. "Look here," he says, his voice quiet with a kind of professional awe, "the heat-affected zone." Along the edge of a tool mark, the crystalline structure of the quartz has been visibly altered. The heat required to do that, especially with the speed indicated by the tool marks, is immense. It far exceeds what could be generated by simple friction from a copper tool. This isn't a theory. It is a physical fact, visible at a microscopic level. The tool that cut this stone was not just powerful, it was incredibly hot. Or it was moving at a speed that generated that heat as a byproduct. He switches to another sample, this one from a diorite bowl. And here, he continues, the fracturing is conchoidal. That means the material was removed in flakes, not ground away by an abrasive. This type of fracture pattern is more consistent with a high-pressure impact or a high-frequency vibration than with the slow, grinding work of hand tools. The geologist has no final answers for you. He is not an archaeologist. His job is simply to describe what he sees in the stone, and what he sees is a manufacturing signature that does not belong in the ancient world. He faces a dilemma. His data directly contradicts the established archaeological record. The stones themselves testify to a technology that should not exist. Here, in the quiet, sterile world of the laboratory, the mystery only deepens, as the hardest of sciences confirms the most impossible of questions. You are now in a library surrounded by the quiet rustle of turning pages and the scent of aging books. You are not looking for a physical artifact, but for a ghost. A book so powerful, legend says it was locked away for the good of mankind. The Book of Thoth. Thoth was the Egyptian god of wisdom, the scribe of the gods and the master of magic and knowledge. Ancient texts claim he authored a book containing all the secrets of the universe, spells to command the heavens and the earth, the ability to understand the speech of animals, and the secrets of immortality itself. The book was said to have been inscribed on 42 scrolls of papyrus. It was not a religious text in the way we understand it, but more of a scientific or mystical treatise, a manual for reality. One story tells of a pharaoh's son who found the book hidden in a golden box at the bottom of the Nile. Upon reading it, he could enchant the sky and the ground and know all that was hidden. But possessing such knowledge came at a terrible price. His family was taken from him, and in his grief, he returned the book to its watery grave. This book has never been found. Most scholars believe it never existed, that it is a purely symbolic myth about the dangers of forbidden knowledge. But what if it was real? What if it contained not spells, but scientific formulae? Not magic, but a deep understanding of physics, mathematics, and sacred geometry that we would not rediscover for thousands of years? The principles of sacred geometry, the idea that certain mathematical ratios like phi, the golden ratio, govern the structure of the universe, are encoded in every major temple and pyramid in Egypt. The proportions of the Great Pyramid, for example, contain breathtakingly accurate calculations for the dimensions of the Earth and the precise value of pi. This knowledge is not supposed to exist in the 3rd millennium BCE. Perhaps the Book of Thoth wasn't a book of magic, but the source code. The architectural plan, the lost science written down that powered an entire civilization. You sit in a darkened room, illuminated only by the glow of a computer monitor. On the screen, a CAD program renders the Great Pyramid of Giza in 3-dimensional space. The exterior is familiar, an icon of the ancient world. But now, you begin to strip away the outer layers, revealing the intricate network of chambers and passageways within. The King's Chamber, the Queen's Chamber, the Grand Gallery, the subterranean pit. You enter the precise known measurements, the base length, the height, the angle of the sides, and as the numbers populate the fields, something extraordinary happens. Mathematical relationships begin to appear, unbidden. If you take the perimeter of the pyramid's base and divide it by twice its height, you get a number, 3.14159. Pi, accurate to several decimal places. If you take the pyramid's height and multiply it by 1 billion, you get the average distance from the Earth to the Sun. These are not random coincidences. The entire structure is a mathematical Rosetta Stone. The standard Egyptian unit of measurement, the royal cubit, is itself derived from the dimensions of our planet. It is 1/10,000,000th of the Earth's polar radius. This implies that whoever designed these structures had access to geodetic data, knowledge of the exact size and shape of the Earth, that we did not accurately calculate until the satellite age. They knew the circumference of the planet. They knew the length of the year to an astonishing degree of accuracy. They understood the subtle wobble of the Earth's axis, the precession of the equinoxes, a cycle that takes nearly 26,000 years to complete. This knowledge is encoded in the alignments, the proportions, and the very dimensions of the stones. The geometry is not just for show. It is a library, a repository of scientific information, expressed in a universal language of number and form. The question is not whether this knowledge is present, but who possessed it, and how. You are lying on your back on the cool stone floor of the King's Chamber, deep inside the Great Pyramid. The air is still and silent, a silence so profound it seems to have weight. Your headlamp illuminates the towering granite walls, perfectly flat and joined with seams so fine you cannot slip a piece of paper between them. Above you, the roof is formed from 9 colossal granite slabs, weighing a total of 400 tons. Your gaze drifts to the 4 narrow shafts that angle upwards from this chamber, disappearing into the darkness. For centuries these were believed to be ventilation shafts. But in the 1990s, an engineer named Robert Bauval noticed something extraordinary. The shafts are not random. They are astronomical alignments. At the time the pyramid was supposedly built, around 2500 BCE, the southern shaft pointed directly to the belt stars of the constellation Orion, the celestial representation of the god Osiris. The northern shaft pointed to Thuban, the pole star of that era. The pyramids on the ground, you realize, are a mirror of the stars in the sky. The 3 pyramids of Giza are arranged in the precise configuration of the 3 stars of Orion's belt, including their respective sizes and luminosity. It is a perfect map. This discovery transformed our understanding of the pyramids. They were not just tombs, they were resurrection machines, designed to project the soul of the pharaoh towards a specific destination in the heavens. The pyramid texts, the oldest religious writings in the world, are carved on the walls of later pyramids. They describe this journey in detail, a complex and dangerous voyage for the soul through the underworld, culminating in a rebirth among the imperishable stars. The texts are a user's manual for a technology of consciousness, and the pyramids are the hardware. The language is spiritual, but the engineering is precise, designed to function on a cosmic scale. The question that remains is whether this was merely a symbolic belief, or if they knew something about the nature of reality that we have yet to rediscover. You're in the burial chamber of the Pyramid of Unas at Saqqara. Unlike the stark, empty chamber at Giza, every surface here is covered in columns of blue-green hieroglyphs. Your flashlight beam dances across the walls, illuminating the oldest and most complete collection of the pyramid texts. The air is dry, and the silence is absolute. You begin to read the translations. O King, you have not departed dead, you have departed living. A ramp to the sky is built for him, that he may ascend thereon to the sky. The language is poetic, filled with imagery of flight, of transformation, of becoming a star. Egyptologists read these as purely metaphorical, a beautiful set of prayers to ensure a safe passage into a symbolic afterlife. But what if the language is not entirely symbolic? What if it is also, in its own way, technical? The texts describe the pharaoh's spirit, his bar, travelling through a gate. They speak of a journey on a celestial boat, of challenges to be overcome, and of a final merging with the light of Osiris in the constellation of Orion. The pyramid itself, with its precisely aligned shafts, is the launch pad. The texts are the flight instructions. Consider the materials. The king's chamber is built almost entirely of Aswan granite, a stone rich in quartz crystal. Quartz has piezoelectric properties, meaning it generates an electric field when put under pressure. The sheer weight of the pyramid, 6 million tons, exerts unimaginable pressure on this chamber. Some researchers have theorized that the pyramid was designed to harness the natural resonant frequencies of the Earth, turning the entire structure into a massive energy-focusing device. In this context, the texts read differently. The doors of the sky are opened for you. May you be raised up. It ceases to be just poetry. It starts to sound like a process, a sequence of events, a description of a physical transformation. The line between spirituality and science begins to blur, suggesting they were once two sides of the same lost understanding. You stand before the great pylon of the Temple of Horus at Edfu. It is one of the best preserved temples in Egypt, a colossal structure that rises against the brilliant blue of the desert sky. The late afternoon sun casts long shadows, and the air is filled with the calls of birds nesting in the high cornices. While the temple itself dates to the Ptolemaic period, around 200 BCE, the inscriptions on its walls claim it is a copy of a much, much older design. These are the Edfu building texts, and they tell a remarkable story. They describe the original temple not as a human creation, but as a structure that descended from the heavens in a remote, primeval age known as the Zep Tepi, the first time. The texts state that the plans for the temple were contained in a sacred book, brought to earth by beings of immense wisdom known as the Shemsu Hor, the same followers of Horus mentioned in the Turin Papyrus and on the Palermo stone. The texts are surprisingly specific. They are not vague myths, but detailed architectural records. They list the precise dimensions of each room, the location of every door and sanctuary. They describe the temple's purpose not merely as a place of worship, but as a kind of resurrection machine, a place where the world itself was regenerated and renewed through ritual. The temple was seen as a functioning model of the cosmos, a place where sacred sound and geometry could be used to maintain the harmony of creation. Here, the mystery of the king lists and the mystery of the advanced technology converge. The texts explicitly state that the knowledge for this incredible architecture came from a much earlier source, from a forgotten golden age. The Ptolemaic Egyptians who carved these walls were not the inventors of this science. They were its inheritors, faithfully copying a blueprint they may no longer have fully understood. The stones of Edfu do not just form a temple, they form a library, preserving the memory of a time when gods, or beings like gods, walked the earth and shared a knowledge that we have only just begun to glimpse. You trace the fine inscriptions on the Edfu temple walls, your fingers following the lines of a story that feels both impossibly ancient and strangely familiar. The texts describe the Zep Tepi, the first time, in a vivid detail. They speak of a sacred island, the homeland of the primeval ones, which was the original source of their civilization. This island, they say, was destroyed by a great flood. The survivors, a handful of wise beings, dispersed across the world, carrying the seeds of their knowledge with them. One group, led by the god Thoth, came to the land of Egypt to found a new civilization. This is a story that echoes in cultures all over the world. Plato wrote of the island nation of Atlantis, a technologically advanced society that vanished beneath the waves in a single day and night of misfortune. The Sumerian king lists speak of a great flood that wiped out their earliest kings. The Bible tells of Noah. The Hindu Puranas describe the Matsya avatar of Vishnu, who saved humanity from a world-ending deluge. Could these be independent myths? Or are they all distant memories of the same, real, cataclysmic event? The Edfu texts are adamant. They are not describing a metaphor, they are recording a history. They speak of the primeval ones as master builders, who possessed a profound understanding of the laws of nature. They were not gods in a supernatural sense, but masters of a science so advanced it would appear to us as magic. The temple at Edfu, then, is more than a place of worship. It is a memorial, an archive, an attempt to preserve the wisdom of a drowned world. It suggests that Egyptian civilization did not begin on the banks of the Nile, but was a legacy, a second chance. The evidence for this lost world is not buried under sand, but carved in plain sight on temple walls, dismissed as myth because the truth is too difficult to comprehend. That we are a species with amnesia, living amongst the ruins of a forgotten chapter of our own story. You leave Egypt, travelling north into the sun-scorched plains of southeastern Turkey. Here, on a rounded hilltop overlooking a vast empty landscape, lies a site that has shattered our understanding of the ancient past, Göbekli Tepe. The air is clear and dry, and the only sound is the wind whistling through the tall grasses. You walk among circles of colossal T-shaped pillars, each carved from a single piece of limestone. They stand 5 meters tall and weigh up to 20 tons. Their surfaces are covered in exquisite high-relief carvings of animals, foxes, snakes, wild boars, and strange, menacing birds. This is the oldest temple in the world. But that description barely scratches the surface of its importance. Radiocarbon dating places the construction of Göbekli Tepe at around 9,600 BCE. That is almost 12,000 years ago. To put that in perspective, this site is 7,000 years older than the Great Pyramid of Giza. It is 6,000 years older than Stonehenge. It was built at the end of the last ice age, by people who were supposedly nomadic hunter-gatherers, living in a pre-agricultural, pre-literate world. Yet the scale and sophistication of this site defy that label. Quarrying, transporting, and erecting hundreds of multi-ton pillars requires a level of social organisation, engineering skill, and abstract thought that was not supposed to exist for another 5,000 years. This is not the work of a small, wandering tribe. This is a massive, coordinated project that would have taken centuries to complete. The existence of Göbekli Tepe presents a profound contradiction. History tells us that agriculture came first, which led to settled communities, which then developed the complexity to build monuments. But this place turns that timeline on its head. Here, it seems, the temple came first. The will to build something sacred, something monumental, may have been the very catalyst that drove humanity to invent civilization. It's a silent stone library of a forgotten human epoch. You run your hand over the cool, carved surface of a pillar at Göbekli Tepe. The stone feels ancient, alive with texture. You trace the outline of a vulture, its wings outstretched. On another pillar you see a strange symbol, a handbag or basket held in the talons of a bird. You have seen this symbol before. 7,000 years later and 1,500 kilometers to the south, it appears in the hands of the gods of Sumeria. Another 3,000 years after that, it is held by winged deities in ancient Mesoamerica. This is the most haunting mystery of Göbekli Tepe. It is not just the age of the site, but the symbolism it contains. The vulture is a symbol of death and rebirth. The serpent, carved on other pillars, is a symbol of wisdom and healing. These are not just images of animals. They are archetypes, foundational concepts that will echo through nearly every major civilization that follows. And then there is the deliberate burial. Around 8,000 BCE, after nearly 2 millennia of use, the creators of Göbekli Tepe did something extraordinary. They carefully and intentionally buried their entire temple complex under thousands of tons of earth, preserving it perfectly for the archaeologists who would uncover it 10,000 years later. Why? Why would a culture spend centuries building such a monument, only to entomb it? Some researchers believe the carvings on the pillars are not just decorative but astronomical. One pillar, known as Pillar 43, appears to be a date stamp, a celestial map of the sky, as it would have appeared around 10,150 BCE, depicting a cataclysmic comet impact that triggered a period of abrupt climate change known as the Younger Dryas. It is a warning, a message. The survivors of that cataclysm, perhaps the very people described in the Edfu texts, may have built this site as a message to the future, a time capsule. They buried it to ensure that the memory of what happened, and the knowledge they possessed, would survive the long night of the coming ages. You stand on a grassy hill overlooking London, the modern city sprawling below. Here at the Royal Observatory in Greenwich, time itself was standardised. The prime meridian, the zero line of longitude, is marked by a brass strip on the ground. Inside the observatory, Antique brass telescopes and complex clockwork mechanisms gleam in the soft light, the very instruments that allowed us to finally map our world and our place in the cosmos. You're here to understand a specific celestial phenomenon, the precession of the equinoxes. It is the slow 26,000-year wobble of the Earth on its axis, which causes the position of the stars to gradually shift over vast periods of time. We didn't fully calculate or comprehend this great cycle until the 19th century, with the aid of advanced telescopes and Newtonian physics, and yet the ancient Egyptians knew. The astronomical alignments of their temples are not just oriented to the stars of their time, they are designed to mark the passing of the precessional ages. The Temple of Karnak, for example, was built and rebuilt over 2,000 years, with each new addition subtly shifting its axis to follow the slow drift of the stars. The entire Giza plateau, when viewed through astronomical software, acts as a massive precessional clock. The Sphinx, which gazes due east, marks the vernal equinox. The constellation rising behind the sun on that day determines the astrological age. We are in the age of Pisces, before that was Aries. When the Great Pyramid was supposedly built, it was the age of Taurus, but the Sphinx, a lion, would have marked the age of Leo, a period that ended around 10,500 BCE. This implies an unbroken chain of astronomical observation, lasting for thousands, if not tens of thousands of years. It suggests that the builders of these monuments were not just creating tombs, they were creating immense stone calendars designed to keep time on a scale that dwarfs human history. They were watching the stars with a purpose we have forgotten, measuring a cycle so long that it has become the stuff of myth. You are back in Egypt, standing on the roof of the Temple of Hathor at Dendera, beneath a replica of the most sophisticated astronomical map from the ancient world. The original circular zodiac now resides in the Louvre, but here, under the open sky, you can feel its intended power. The relief is a planisphere, a flat map of the heavens, showing all 12 zodiacal constellations, as well as other star groups used by the Egyptians. At first glance, it appears to be a snapshot of the sky from the time the temple was built during the late Ptolemaic period. But when you look closer, you see that the map is not static. It is a dynamic model designed to illustrate the process of precessional change. The constellations are arranged in a slow, counterclockwise spiral, depicting the very wobble of the Earth's axis that you contemplated in Greenwich. The symbols for the solstices and equinoxes are marked, allowing astronomers to calculate the shifting of the ages. This single piece of stone contains a breathtaking amount of scientific data. It is an astronomical computer. It demonstrates a knowledge that the Egyptians are not supposed to have possessed. While the zodiac itself may have been influenced by Babylonian and Greek astronomy, the underlying understanding of the Great Year, the 26,000-year precessional cycle, feels much, much older. It is the same knowledge encoded at Giza, the same knowledge hinted at in the pyramid texts, and the same knowledge that allows one to date the age of Leo. The Dendera zodiac is not just a map of the stars, it is a map of time itself. It speaks of a deep, abiding obsession with the long cycles of the cosmos, a perspective that sees human history not in terms of dynasties or empires, but in terms of celestial ages. It is the work of a people who believe that our destiny is written in the stars, not as fortune-telling, but as a grand, predictable cycle of creation, destruction, and renewal. It is a final, silent confirmation that they knew exactly where and when they were. You stand in a boat, drifting silently on the Nile near Luxor. The sun is low, painting the sky in shades of orange and violet. On the west bank, the green fields give way abruptly to the bone-dry cliffs of the Theban necropolis. It feels like a land of ghosts, a place where the veil between worlds is thin. It is here, in the tombs of the nobles, that you find a strange and recurring image. In a scene depicting a great feast, you see musicians playing harps and flutes. But among them is a figure holding two objects that look like metal rods, one in each hand. In other tombs, the same figure appears, sometimes with rods, sometimes with what looks like a tuning fork. Egyptologists have long identified this as a purely symbolic pose, representing a ritual gesture. But some acoustical engineers see something else. They see evidence of a lost science of sound. The temples and chambers of ancient Egypt are not just architecturally magnificent, they are acoustically perfect. The king's chamber in the Great Pyramid, for example, is a massive resonance box tuned to a specific frequency. The granite sarcophagus inside rings like a bell when struck, vibrating at a frequency that has been measured at 110 Hz, a frequency known to have profound effects on human consciousness. The ancient texts speak of priests using incantations and chants to achieve altered states of awareness. Could it be that the rods and tuning forks were not symbolic, but were tools used to generate and manipulate sound? Could the temples themselves have been designed as immense musical instruments, using harmonic resonance to interact with the human body and mind? The idea is startling, but it aligns with a growing body of research into the power of sound to affect both matter and consciousness. The silent tombs may not have been so silent after all. They may have once hummed with a power that we have long forgotten how to hear, a technology built not of circuits and gears, but of pure vibration. You travel now to a place of utter cold and isolation, a climate science facility in Greenland. The wind howls outside, a constant mournful sound against the insulated walls. Inside, you stand in a refrigerated archive, your breath turning to frost. Before you are long cylinders of ice drilled from 3 kilometers deep within the ice sheet. Each cylinder is a frozen timeline of the Earth's atmosphere, stretching back over 100,000 years. You're not looking for artifacts here, but for the chemical fingerprints of a cataclysm. A scientist points to a section of an ice core. It is a layer of dark, compacted ice, filled with microscopic bubbles. This layer corresponds to a period that began abruptly 12,800 years ago. It is the beginning of the Younger Dryas, a mysterious 1,000-year return to Ice Age conditions that interrupted the warming trend at the end of the Pleistocene. For decades, the cause of this climate shift was a mystery, but analysis of this ice layer has revealed something shocking. It contains a thinned black mat rich in nanodiamonds, microscopic spherules of melted rock, and most importantly, a massive spike in platinum, an element rare on Earth, but common in asteroids and comets. This same platinum spike has been found in sediment layers of the same age all over the world. The evidence is overwhelming. 12,800 years ago, our planet was hit by the fragments of a disintegrating comet. The impacts triggered continent-sized forest fires, plunged the world into a nuclear winter, and caused the rapid melting of the North American ice sheets, leading to catastrophic global floods. This is not a theory. It is the story told by the ice, a physical record of the very cataclysm described in the Edfu texts, in the story of Atlantis, and in the flood myths of countless cultures. The first time was not a mythic age of gods, it was the world before this impact. The survivors were not divine beings, they were the last remnants of a lost human civilization. You travel south, deep into the remote Nuba mountains of Sudan. The air is thick with the smell of wood smoke and damp earth. You sit by a fire as the sun sets, casting a warm golden light on the faces of the village elders. The night is filled with the sound of insects and the quiet murmur of voices. There are no written records here. History is not kept in books, but in the memories of the living, passed down from generation to generation through song and story. You have come here to listen. An elder begins to speak, his voice a low rhythmic chant. He tells the story of his people, the Dogon, and their connection to the stars. He speaks of a time long ago when beings called the Nommo came from the sky. These beings, he says, were amphibious, masters of the water. They taught his ancestors about the cosmos. He speaks of the star you know as Sirius. But he doesn't just speak of Sirius A, the brightest star in our night sky. He speaks of its invisible companion, Sirius B, a tiny, incredibly dense white dwarf star that is impossible to see without a modern telescope. He describes its 50-year elliptical orbit around the main star. He knows its weight. He knows its properties. This is knowledge that Western astronomy did not confirm until the mid-19th century. How could a people with no written language and no telescopes possess such specific, accurate astronomical data? The elders say it is simple. They were told. It is memory, preserved for thousands of years. This oral tradition, a living library of ancient knowledge, provides a startling parallel to the Egyptian texts. Both speak of wise beings, masters of the water, who came in a remote time and brought the gift of civilization. The story is the same, whether it is carved in stone at Edfu or spoken into the warm night air of the Sudanese mountains. It is a memory that refuses to die. The fire crackles. sending sparks up into the immense star-filled African sky. The elder's story continues, weaving a tapestry of memory that stretches back into the deep past. He speaks not only of the stars, but of the earth. He tells of a great cataclysm, a time when the world was consumed by water and fire and the sky fell. You think of the black mat in the Greenland ice cores. You think of the geological evidence for the younger Dryas impact. The story being told by this tribal elder, a story preserved without writing for thousands of years, aligns perfectly with the latest findings of cutting-edge planetary science. The myth and the geology are telling the same story. This is not an isolated case. Across the world, indigenous cultures preserve oral traditions that speak of a former age of the world, a paradise lost to a global cataclysm. They speak of advanced ancestors, of sky gods who brought knowledge, and of a great forgetting that followed the disaster. For centuries, these stories have been dismissed by academia as primitive folklore, creation myths with no basis in reality. But what if they are not myths at all? What if they are eyewitness accounts, testimonies from the survivors of a genuine global catastrophe, passed down through countless generations? What if oral tradition is a far more reliable method of preserving history than we have ever believed? The implications are staggering. It suggests that the clues to our own forgotten past are not just buried in the ground or written in ancient texts. They're alive today, held in the collective memory of indigenous peoples. It requires a fundamental shift in perspective, a willingness to listen to these voices with the same respect we give to any other form of evidence. When you do, the pieces of the puzzle begin to fit together. The geology, the astronomy, the archaeology, and the ancient stories all start to point in the same direction, towards a lost episode in the human story, an episode we're only now beginning to remember. Your journey takes you back to the library, to the oldest stories ever written down. You're in ancient Sumer, in the Fertile Crescent between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. On a clay tablet written in the delicate wedge-shaped marks of cuneiform, you find the story of Oannes. According to the Sumerian texts recorded by the priest Berossus, Oannes was an amphibious being who emerged from the Persian Gulf in the earliest days of their civilization. He was described as having the body of a fish, but with a human head beneath the fish's head, and human feet. By day, he would come ashore to teach humanity the fundamentals of civilization, writing, mathematics, law, agriculture, and architecture. At night, he would return to the sea. Oannes was the first of 7 such beings, the 7 sages, or Apkallu, who brought the gifts of knowledge to mankind. This story is eerily familiar. It is the same archetype you encountered in the Edfu texts, which spoke of wise beings from a drowned land. It is the same story you heard by the fire in the Nuba Mountains, of the amphibious Nommo who brought astronomical knowledge. In Mesoamerica, the Maya worshipped a feathered serpent god, Kukulkan, who came from the sea and taught them the secrets of the calendar and astronomy. In Peru, the god Viracocha emerged from Lake Titicaca to bring civilization to the Andes. The pattern is undeniable. All around the world, the foundational myths of our oldest civilizations tell the same story. Knowledge was not invented, but given. It was a legacy, a deliberate transfer of information from a group of survivors, known to history as the 7 sages, the followers of Horus the Nommo. They are the knowledge bearers, the mysterious teachers who appear in the aftermath of a global cataclysm, tasked with restarting the human story. The consistency of this myth is perhaps the most powerful evidence of all that it is not a myth, but a memory. You are back at Giza, standing on the sand-swept causeway that connects the Sphinx to the Khafra pyramid. The sun is setting, and the monuments glow with a final fiery light. You look at the timeline laid out before you, a cataclysm around 12,000 years ago. The sudden appearance of Göbekli Tepe 1,000 years later, a repository of astronomical knowledge. Then, an apparent dark age of 6,000 years, a long silence in the archaeological record. And then, suddenly, Egypt. Civilization emerges seemingly overnight, fully formed and breathtakingly sophisticated. Its art, its architecture, its writing, its science, all appear at their peak at the very beginning, only to slowly decline over the next 3,000 years. This is the great anomaly of Egypt. Civilizations are supposed to start small and grow more complex. Egypt starts at a pinnacle of achievement and slowly forgets. This is where the Shemsu Hor, the followers of Horus, fit into the timeline. According to the king lists, they ruled Egypt during that long 6,000-year gap. The Edfu texts say they were the survivors from the drowned world. Could it be that they spent those millennia after the cataclysm working behind the scenes, slowly preparing the ground, teaching the scattered, traumatized survivors of humanity the basics of civilization? This theory connects all the disparate pieces. It explains the advanced knowledge. It explains the sudden appearance of Egyptian civilization. It explains the consistent stories of wise teachers. It suggests that the pyramids and temples were not the work of Bronze Age farmers, but the final, crowning achievement of a much older and more sophisticated culture, the last great act of the survivors of a lost golden age. It is a radical idea. It requires us to question the very foundations of our history. But as you stand here, watching the last light fade from the face of the Sphinx, you realize that the stones themselves have been asking us to do just that for a very, very long time. They are monuments not to a king or a god, but to a forgotten chapter of the human journey. You stand at the entrance to the Red Pyramid at Dashur. The setting sun bathes the smooth limestone in a soft rose-coloured light. A gentle breeze carries the scent of the desert. This pyramid, older than those at Giza, has a unique acoustic property. If you stand in the centre of its main chamber and hum a low note, the entire structure begins to vibrate. The sound is amplified, focused, and reflected back at you, seeming to emanate from the stone itself. This is not an accident. It is a deliberate feat of acoustical engineering. The chambers of the pyramids and the inner sanctuaries of the temples were designed to be resonant cavities. They were built to harness the power of sound, but to what end? The pyramid texts speak of the pharaoh becoming one with Osiris. The Edfu texts describe the temple as a place of world regeneration. These are transformations. Perhaps the technology of this lost civilization was not based on external machinery, but on an internal science of consciousness. Perhaps the resonant chambers, the precise astronomical alignments, the sacred geometry, all of it was designed for a single purpose: to create a powerful psychoacoustic environment. An environment that could induce altered states of awareness, facilitate out-of-body experiences, and perhaps even allow for the transfer of consciousness itself. In this light, the sarcophagus in the king's chamber is not a coffin, but a resonator. The Dendera Light is not a light bulb, but a depiction of the vital energy of the universe. The pyramid texts are not just prayers, but a step-by-step guide to navigating non-physical realms. This was a technology of the soul, a science that understood the fundamental connection between vibration, consciousness, and the fabric of the cosmos. It suggests that their greatest achievements were not what they built with their hands, but what they were able to achieve with their minds. And this, perhaps, is the greatest secret they tried to preserve. You lie once more inside the granite sarcophagus in the king's chamber. The lid is gone, and the space is open to the immense silent darkness of the pyramid. The air is cool and still. You close your eyes and begin to hum, searching for the resonant frequency of the room. At first, there is nothing. Then you find it. A low, deep tone. The sound begins to build. It is not just in your ears, it is in your bones, in the very air you breathe. The granite box beneath you vibrates, a subtle but powerful hum that seems to connect with the larger structure of the pyramid itself. The chamber, built with impossible precision from a stone rich in quartz crystal, becomes a giant amplifier. The sound is no longer something you're making. It is something the pyramid is making with you. Modern science is only now beginning to explore the effects of specific sound frequencies on the human brain. Low-frequency sound, particularly in the theta wave range of 4 to 7 Hz, is known to induce deep meditative states, vivid imagery, and even out-of-body experiences. Early acoustical studies in the king's chamber have recorded a consistent, powerful standing wave with a fundamental frequency in precisely this range. The chamber was not designed for burial, it was designed to function. It is a finely tuned instrument built to generate and focus a very specific kind of energy. The purpose, as described in the pyramid texts, was transformation, to allow the consciousness of the initiate to leave the body and travel to the stars. You let the sound wash over you, feeling the deep, resonant hum in every cell of your body. The line between myth and science, between spirituality and technology, dissolves. You are inside the machine. And as the vibration deepens, you begin to understand that the greatest mysteries of this ancient land are not about how they cut the stones, but why. The answer lies not in a lost tool, but in a lost state of being. You stand on the waterfront of modern Alexandria, watching the Mediterranean waves break against the seawall. The air is salty and humid. Beneath your feet, and beneath the bustling modern city, lie the ruins of the greatest repository of knowledge in the ancient world, the Great Library of Alexandria. Nothing of it remains. It exists now only as a ghost, a memory of a catastrophic loss. Founded in the 3rd century BCE, the library was an ambitious attempt to collect all of the world's knowledge under one roof. At its peak, it was said to contain over 500,000 papyrus scrolls covering every subject imaginable: mathematics, astronomy, medicine, philosophy, and history. It was a beacon of intellectual life, a place where the greatest minds of the age came to study and to learn, and within its walls, we are told, were texts that described a history far older than our own. It housed the lost works of Manetho, the Egyptian priest who chronicled the dynasties of gods who ruled for millennia. It contained the writings of Berossus, who told the story of the amphibious sages of Sumeria. It may even have held copies, or summaries, of the legendary Book of Thoth. But this knowledge was deemed a threat. The library was damaged and burned in a series of conflicts, culminating in its final destruction in the 4th century AD. The loss is incalculable. It is the intellectual equivalent of a mass extinction event. We will never know what secrets were turned to ash. We will never know what technologies, what histories, what sciences were deliberately erased from the human story. All we have now are the echoes, the fragments that survived in other texts. We have the strange sophistication of the Antikythera mechanism, an ancient Greek astronomical computer that shouldn't exist. We have the Baghdad battery. We have the impossible precision of Egyptian stonework. These are the ghosts of the library's lost knowledge, isolated artifacts that hint at a far more advanced and complex ancient world than we have been taught to imagine. You walk through the cavernous ruins of the Baths of Caracalla in Rome. The scale is immense, the architectural ambition breathtaking, but your mind is miles away and centuries earlier in the smouldering ashes of the Alexandrian library. You think about what was lost, but then you think about what survived. Papyrus is fragile, stone is not. While the scrolls burned, the knowledge they contained was not entirely erased. Much of it had already been carved into the walls of the Egyptian temples. The Edfu building texts, the astronomical ceilings of Dendera, the pyramid texts at Saqqara, these are the stone pages of the library's lost volumes. They are the backup copy, the fireproof archive, and this knowledge did not die with the pharaohs. It went underground, preserved in secret societies and mystery schools. The Hermetic traditions, which would later fuel the European Renaissance, trace their origins directly back to the wisdom of Thoth, the Egyptian god of knowledge. The mathematical and philosophical breakthroughs of the ancient Greeks are deeply indebted to what they learned in Egypt. Pythagoras, the father of modern mathematics and music theory, was said to have studied for 22 years in the Egyptian temples. The knowledge was never truly lost. It was fragmented, scattered, and driven into hiding. It became heresy, alchemy, and esoteric philosophy. But its fingerprints are everywhere. They are in the sacred geometry of the great cathedrals of Europe. They are in the star charts of the Renaissance astronomers. They are in the quiet hum of the resonant frequencies that underpin our modern understanding of physics. The burning of the library was not the end of the story. It was a bottleneck, a moment of profound crisis that forced a change in the way knowledge was preserved. It became a secret, whispered from master to apprentice, hidden in plain sight in art, architecture, and myth. And it is there still, waiting for us to learn how to read the language of the stones and remember who we once were. The journey ends where it began, on the Giza plateau. The night is deep and black, the air cool and still. The pyramids are immense, silent shapes against a sea of stars. You stand before the Sphinx, its ancient, eroded face staring out towards the eastern horizon, as it has for thousands of years. The pieces of the puzzle float in your mind. The impossible precision of the stonework, the sophisticated knowledge of astronomy and mathematics, the consistent stories of a global cataclysm and the wise teachers who came after. The physical evidence of that cataclysm, frozen in the ice cores. the deliberate burial of Göbekli Tepe, the astronomical date stamp marking the beginning of the Younger Dryas. A new story begins to take shape, not of primitive people inexplicably creating wonders, but of a message, deliberately and painstakingly preserved. A message from a lost civilization, the inheritors of the flame, who survived a world-ending catastrophe and dedicated themselves to ensuring that their knowledge would not be lost forever. They encoded it in stone, in myth, and in the very layout of their sacred sites. They built a library of stone and stars, a library designed to survive the ravages of time and speak to a future generation, our generation, that would finally have the scientific tools to understand what was being said. They were not building tombs for dead kings. They were building a bridge across time. This journey has not been about aliens or supernatural beings. It has been about us. About a forgotten chapter in the human story, a chapter that speaks to a level of genius, resilience, and wisdom that we are only now beginning to appreciate. The final mystery is not what happened to them, but what we will do with their legacy now that we are finally beginning to remember. The silence of the stones is not an absence of answers. It is an invitation to ask the right questions. The stars begin to appear over this Giza plateau, cold and brilliant in the clear desert air. You look up at the constellation of Orion, hanging in the southern sky, a perfect mirror of the three great pyramids below. You think of the journey you've taken, a journey through time, through myth, and through the hard data of science. The pieces are all there, scattered across the globe, waiting to be assembled. The anomalous artifacts, the batteries, the precision-cut stones, the astronomical maps, the consistent myths of a great flood, and the wise teachers who came after, the geological and astronomical data that points to a global cataclysm at the end of the last ice age, and the Egyptian texts themselves, which speak of a primeval golden age, a time before their own, when a civilization of immense wisdom flourished. We have been taught that history is a straight line, an uninterrupted march of progress from primitive hunter-gatherers to us. But the evidence suggests a different story, a cyclical story, a story of rise and fall, of cataclysm and renewal, a story of a highly advanced human civilization that was all but wiped from the face of the earth, leaving behind only these enigmatic clues. They were masters of astronomy, of mathematics, of engineering. But their greatest science may have been a science of life itself, an understanding of consciousness and the cosmos that we are only now, in our own age, beginning to grope towards. They left their legacy not in fragile papyrus, which they knew would turn to dust, but in megalithic stone, which they knew would endure. You place your hand on the cool, weathered flank of the Sphinx. The stone feels ancient, eternal. It has kept its vigil for more than 12,000 years, watching the stars turn, waiting for a generation to come along that could finally understand the language it speaks. Perhaps that time is now. Perhaps we are the ones who are meant to remember. The first light of dawn spills over the horizon, painting the eastern sky in pale shades of rose and gold. You are back on the Giza plateau, but the world feels different now. The stones seem less like ancient relics, and more like pieces of a grand unsolved puzzle. The air is cool and still, holding the deep silence of the pre-dawn hour. The pyramids are black monoliths against the growing light, their perfect geometry a testament to a forgotten science. You are not the same person who began this journey. You have seen the evidence with your own eyes. You have touched the impossibly precise stonework. You have read the astronomical data encoded in the temples. You have heard the echoes of a global cataclysm in the stories of indigenous elders and in the silent testimony of the Greenland ice. You have walked through a library whose books are made of granite and diorite, whose language is mathematics and astronomy. The story these stones tell is not the one you were taught. It is a story that is both far older and far more advanced. It speaks of a lost episode in the human saga, a time when our ancestors possessed a profound understanding of the cosmos and the nature of consciousness itself. This knowledge was not lost to incompetence or the slow decay of time. It was lost to fire and flood. It was lost to a cataclysm that reset the human story, forcing the survivors to begin again, armed with only the fragments of a world that was no more. But they did not let the flame of knowledge die out completely. They became the Shemsu Hor, the seven sages, the Nommo. They became the teachers, planting the seeds of civilization, preserving what they could in a form that could withstand the erosion of millennia, in myth, and in stone. This is their legacy. A message in a bottle cast into the ocean of time, waiting for a future generation to find it. The sun is higher now, warming the ancient stones. The tourists will begin arriving soon, filling this sacred space with the chatter of 1,000 different languages. But for now, there is only the wind and the weight of unanswered questions. You have followed a trail of breadcrumbs left by an impossibly ancient, impossibly advanced civilization, and at every turn, the evidence has contradicted the story we tell about ourselves. The timeline is wrong. The capabilities of ancient peoples have been profoundly underestimated, and a global cataclysm, long dismissed as myth, appears to be a geological fact. To accept this new story is not easy. It means admitting that we are a species with amnesia. It means that vast chapters of our own past are a blank page. It means that we are not the pinnacle of human achievement, but are perhaps only now beginning to climb back to a level of wisdom that our distant ancestors once possessed. But the evidence is undeniable. It is in the mathematics of the pyramids, in the astronomy of the temples, in the tool marks on the granite, and in the platinum layer of the ice. To ignore it is to choose ignorance over curiosity. To dismiss it is to refuse to listen to the voices of our own ancestors. You look once more at the Sphinx, its gaze fixed on the horizon, watching the slow turning of the celestial clock. It has seen empires rise and fall. It has seen languages born and forgotten. It has waited patiently for us to ask the right questions. What did they know? How did they know it? And what does their story mean for us, their distant descendants, living in a world that is once again facing the possibility of great change? The stones do not provide all the answers, but they remind us that the human story is far older, far more mysterious, and far more extraordinary than we have ever dared to imagine. You're on a felucca, a traditional wooden sailing boat drifting down the Nile as night falls. The air is warm and smells of river water and blossoming jasmine. The only sounds are the gentle lapping of water against the hull and the faint music from a distant village. Above, the Milky Way is a brilliant shimmering river of light, a celestial mirror of the Nile below. The ancient Egyptians called the Milky Way the winding waterway. For them, the sky was not a separate realm, but a continuation of their earthly landscape. The journey of the sun god Ra across the sky in his solar boat was a daily reenactment of a journey down the Nile. The stars were not distant, fiery objects, but the souls of the departed, the imperishable ones. You lie back and watch the constellations wheel overhead. You see Orion, the celestial hunter, whom the Egyptians knew as Osiris, god of resurrection. You see the Pleiades, a small, shimmering cluster of stars that marked important agricultural seasons, and you see Sirius, the brightest star in the sky, whose annual rising just before the sun, the heliacal rising, heralded the life-giving inundation of the Nile. Their entire civilization was built around this intimate, sacred connection to the cosmos. Their calendar was a precise map of celestial cycles. Their temples were aligned to specific stars and solar events. Their religion was a science of immortality, designed to transform the human soul into a star. We look at the sky today and see vast, empty distances and the cold, impersonal laws of physics. They looked at the same sky and saw a home, a destination, and a community of ancestors. They saw a living, conscious universe, and they understood that they were a part of it. This perspective is perhaps the most profound piece of lost knowledge. It is a world view that saw no separation between the physical and the spiritual, between science and myth, between the human and the divine. As you drift on the dark waters, under a canopy of brilliant stars, you can almost feel the echo of that ancient cosmic harmony. The gentle rocking of the boat is a quiet rhythm beneath you, a cradle on the ancient river. The stars are a brilliant, silent language, and for the first time on this journey, you feel you're beginning to understand the grammar. You drift on the dark water, a single point of consciousness between two rivers, the Nile below and the great celestial river of the Milky Way above. You reflect on the journey, on the whispers that led you here, the filament in the stone at Dendera, the hum of resonant chambers, the impossible precision of the Serapeum, a feat of engineering that still defies our modern tools. You recall the timelines carved into the Palermo stone, speaking of an age before the pharaohs. You remember the geological scars of a global flood, the memories preserved in ice and in the voices of elders who were never taught to write. The story is not one of linear progress. It is not a slow, steady climb from the mud hut to the skyscraper. It is the story of a great forgetting and a heroic multi-millennial effort to remember. It is the story of a highly sophisticated human civilization, one that understood the deep physics of the cosmos that was brought to its knees by a cataclysm. The survivors were not gods, but human beings of immense knowledge and resilience, who sought to preserve the very essence of their wisdom for a distant future. They knew that papyrus would burn, that oral traditions could fade, and so they built a library that could not be destroyed. The pyramids are not tombs, they are archives. The temples are not just places of worship, they are universities of stone, their walls covered in the textbooks of a lost science. The first light of a new day is beginning to touch the horizon, turning the river from black to silver. The journey to understand this lost chapter of our past is far from over. It is, in truth, just beginning. The stones have delivered their message. The lost texts have spoken their piece. The only question left is, are we ready to listen?